Some people notice something strange when life becomes calm. The moment there's a hint of ease, an old tension quietly wakes up. Maybe this sounds familiar. It's not dramatic and it doesn't look like panic. It's more like a subtle pull toward checking, preparing, correcting. As if happiness is a place you can visit for a moment, but not somewhere you're supposed to stay. There's a quiet pattern that appears in people who learned early on that comfort doesn't last. Maybe you'll recognize something here. When a good moment arrives, their mind doesn't relax into it. Instead, it begins a kind of internal accounting. What could shift? What might go wrong? What hasn't been checked yet? Nothing dramatic. Just a steady habit of scanning that feels almost automatic. For someone like this, happiness isn't rejected because they dislike it. It's interrupted because it feels unstable. A small part of the mind prepares for a break in the rhythm, even when nothing is actually threatening the moment. This creates an odd contradiction. The desire for calm exists, but so does the reflex to protect against it. Over time, this reflex becomes a structure. The person functions well, appears balanced, even seems easygoing on the outside. But inside, every moment of ease triggers a quiet calculation about how long it will last. And in that calculation, the experience of happiness gets edited before it can fully settle. In many situations, a person who grew up expecting sudden shifts doesn't simply enjoy a calm moment. The mind moves first. It begins checking for anything that feels out of place, anything that could interrupt the ease. Maybe this sounds familiar. This isn't negativity or pessimism. It's a form of mental preparedness that once kept life predictable, even in environments where predictability didn't really exist. The cognitive load shows itself quietly. While someone else might settle into a peaceful moment, this person is already running silent background tasks, reviewing recent conversations, replaying tone, scanning for unfinished responsibilities, anticipating the next demand. The body may look relaxed, but the internal pace never fully matches that appearance. There's always one part of the mind that stays slightly elevated, as if lowering the guard would create unnecessary risk. This habit forms early, when calm moments in childhood were followed by tension, interruption, or emotional unpredictability. The brain learned that comfort is not a stable signal, so it adapted. It became faster at noticing shifts, sharper at predicting outcomes, quicker at bracing for impact. Over time, that vigilance fused with the person's sense of normal, and once something feels normal, it rarely gets questioned. In adulthood, this results in an odd friction. Positive moments don't feel fake, they feel fragile. Even something simple like enjoying a quiet evening or feeling appreciated by someone can trigger a small internal flutter. Don't relax too much. The mind starts rehearsing potential disruptions, not because it wants to ruin the moment, but because it learned to protect the person from emotional whiplash. It's a calculation done out of habit, not choice. For some, peace becomes the signal that a problem might be approaching. And when that association forms, happiness doesn't feel like a place to rest. It becomes something to monitor. Sometimes even something to prepare an exit from. In that constant preparation, the mind unintentionally interrupts the experience itself. The moment is still happening, but the person is slightly tilted toward the future, mentally checking where the next shift might come from. And that quiet tilt is often the first step in self-sabotaging happiness before it has the chance to settle. People who learned early not to take up too much emotional space often approach happiness with caution. A positive moment isn't just a moment. It becomes a situation that must be managed. You might recognize something here. Enjoying yourself, expressing excitement, or letting others see what matters to you can feel strangely risky. Not because joy is embarrassing, but because visibility has a cost in certain environments. When someone grows up around people who are dismissive, unpredictable, or easily irritated, showing happiness could trigger reactions they didn't expect. Maybe it led to being teased. Maybe it annoyed someone. Maybe it simply made the room feel less safe. So the person learned to shrink their emotional presence. They became skilled at keeping their inner world quieter than their outer one. As an adult, that skill doesn't just disappear, it becomes a filter. Even when something good happens, there's a subtle instinct to minimize it before anyone else can. A small celebration gets softened, a genuine smile gets delayed, a positive announcement becomes something you don't want to bother anyone with. None of this is dramatic. It's a form of self-preservation that once made relationships easier to navigate. But over time, this filter affects how happiness is felt. If the mind believes expressing joy can invite judgment, jealousy, or misunderstanding, then the safest option is to reduce the intensity of the feeling before it reaches the surface. That reduction becomes habitual. Eventually, the person not only hides their joy, they internally adjust it. They feel less of it simply because feeling more seems unsafe. This is usually the moment when things quietly click for many people. If any part of this feels familiar, naming which detail resonates can be grounding. It often shows how common this quiet pattern actually is. The result is subtle self-sabotage. Not by destroying good moments, but by dimming them until they fit into an emotional environment that once required careful behavior. Happiness becomes something you handle gently, reduce slightly, and protect from exposure. In that process, the experience never has space to fully unfold. It's filtered before it even reaches the surface. There is a quiet habit that appears when someone has spent years managing their internal reactions before anyone else can notice them. Joy doesn't arrive as a spontaneous feeling. It enters like something that needs to be edited. Some people pause when they hear this. They recognize the pattern immediately, an automatic softening of emotion before it becomes visible, even when no one is watching. This kind of self-monitoring isn't about being modest. It's an internal safety check. The mind scans the feeling, reduces what might seem excessive, and shapes it into something that feels more controlled. The process happens quickly, without conscious intent. A moment of excitement becomes a calmer version of itself. A sense of pride turns into something quieter. A hint of hope gets carefully managed. For someone who carries this pattern, expressing strong positive emotion can feel strangely out of balance. It raises a subtle fear of appearing naive, too eager, or unaware of potential consequences, so the mind adjusts the emotion before it fully forms. It shrinks the brightness of the moment to avoid any possibility of being too much, even when the environment is safe. In daily life, this looks deceptively simple. The person smiles a little less than they want to. They downplay achievements without thinking about it. They respond to good news with a measured tone instead of spontaneous enthusiasm. Outwardly, it seems calm. Inwardly, it's a constant negotiation between desire and caution. This is also the point where many people begin to see the cost. If you notice yourself in this description, it can be interesting to observe which moment feels the closest. That small act of noticing often brings more clarity than expected. The tricky part is how this habit influences happiness. When joy is pre-edited, the feeling never reaches its full depth. The person doesn't sabotage the moment directly. They prevent it from growing. What could have been a strong emotional experience becomes something muted, something contained, something that feels safer but also thinner. Over time, this creates a subtle distance from one's own positive emotions. The person is present in the moment, yet slightly removed from its full impact. And in that distance, happiness loses some of its weight. For someone who processes emotions slowly, happiness rarely arrives in real time. The moment happens, the environment feels safe enough, and yet the feeling doesn't fully land until much later. Maybe this sounds familiar. It's not a lack of appreciation. It's a delay created by internal caution, an instinct to make sure the moment is stable before allowing any emotion to settle. This delay often starts in childhood, where reacting too quickly could create problems. If showing excitement invited criticism, or if expressing needs led to tension, the mind learned to wait. It observed first. It adjusted. It waited again. Emotional pacing became a protective rhythm. And once that rhythm forms, it shapes how good moments are experienced long into adulthood. In daily life, this looks subtle. Someone might receive good news and respond politely, almost neutrally. Hours later, when they're alone, when the room is quiet, when no one expects anything, the emotion finally surfaces. The happiness feels real then, but also slightly disconnected from the moment it belonged to. The timing is off. The joy arrives without its original context. This mismatch creates an odd tension. The person knows they should feel happy, yet the body doesn't respond right away. Then, when the feeling eventually appears, the mind critiques the delay. Why now? Why not earlier? What's wrong with me? Nothing is wrong. The delay is simply a learned rhythm of emotional safety. But the delay has consequences. When happiness consistently lands late, the person begins to believe they're not capable of feeling things fully. They imagine themselves detached or ungrateful, when in reality, they're just cautious. The internal system checks every emotional signal before letting it through. It's a form of self-protection that once made perfect sense. Over time, though, this pacing can turn happiness into something that feels out of reach. The emotion is real, but it arrives after the moment has passed. And because it doesn't align with the event itself, the mind sometimes dismisses it or questions it. In that quiet gap, happiness loses some of its immediacy, and the person starts assuming they're the problem, when the timing, not the feeling, is what's different. Before a positive moment fully settles, some minds start predicting every possible outcome. It's not intentional. It's a habit built from years of needing to stay one step ahead. For someone like this, clarity comes quickly, sometimes too quickly. They see what could change, what might break, and what needs to be managed long before anything has actually shifted. Nothing dramatic, just a constant readiness. This kind of anticipation feels like insight, and in many ways it is, but it carries a cost. The moment something good happens, the mind jumps ahead to protect the person from disappointment. It drafts scenarios, examines risks, and quietly adjusts expectations. The intention is safety. The consequence is distance. The person ends up observing the moment more than participating in it. In daily life, this can look like skepticism, but it's not cynicism. It's a form of emotional bracing. When someone is used to sudden changes, they learn not to trust the initial relief. A compliment becomes something to analyze. A stable relationship becomes something to monitor. A lucky break becomes something to question. The person isn't rejecting happiness. They're trying to make sure it doesn't collapse unexpectedly. Some people pause when they realize this. The anticipation doesn't come from fear of happiness itself. It comes from knowing how quickly good things can shift, especially in environments where unpredictability was the norm. The mind learned to stay ahead of the curve, to notice small inconsistencies, to prepare for outcomes before they appear. And once that habit becomes automatic, it rarely slows down on its own. The challenge is that anticipation can unintentionally shrink the moment. Instead of letting happiness unfold naturally, the person starts managing it. They lower expectations, soften the emotional impact, and create backup plans. The moment becomes something to navigate instead of something to fill. Over time, this creates a subtle disconnect. The brain is too busy predicting the future to experience the present. That's the paradox. Insight protects, but it also interrupts. Anticipation helps prevent emotional surprises, but it also prevents full emotional presence. And with every quiet calculation, happiness becomes slightly more distant. Not because it's unwelcome, but because it's treated like something that needs to be handled carefully. When all these patterns come together, happiness stops feeling simple. It becomes something layered, something that carries both comfort and tension. The person wants ease, but their internal pacing was shaped in places where ease didn't last. So the mind still prepares, still softens, still checks the emotional temperature of every moment. None of this is intentional. It's a structure built slowly from years of learning how to stay safe. Across the sections, one thread stays consistent. Happiness isn't sabotaged out of resistance to joy. It's interrupted by habits formed long before adulthood. Habits that once protected the person from disappointment, conflict, or sudden change. The vigilance remains, even when it's no longer necessary. The anticipation remains, even when the environment is stable. The quiet management of emotion remains, even when the moment is positive. What looks like self-sabotage is often just an old rhythm playing itself again. A rhythm where comfort requires monitoring, where excitement feels fragile, where emotional safety depends on staying a little ahead of the moment. This rhythm isn't a flaw, it's a lived pattern. And when someone finally sees that pattern clearly, they understand something important. The difficulty isn't in feeling happiness, it's in trusting the space around it.